African Americans run away to the North. You still have some free African Americans in the South. So they were more likely to be lynched. But the majority of the lynchings are going to take place after the Civil War ends, during the Jim Crow era and into the early 1900s as well. Lynchings were used to punish African Americans primarily through the eras of slavery and Jim Crow, were used as an indicator in the study because they are recognizable forms of violence used to suppress and intimidate Black people. The research also cited a study that analyzed 30 dedication speeches for Confederate monuments and found that half of these speeches use explicitly racist language. Okay, the research also cited a study that analyzed 30 dedication speeches for Confederate monuments and found that half of them use explicitly racist phrases. Some even mentioned protecting the Anglo-Saxon race. Now, it's important to note that even though General Robert E. Lee was a white supremacist, and even though he was a brutal slave owner, things like this, after the Civil War ended, General Robert E. Lee was against Confederate monuments, and he was against using any of the Confederate flags after the Civil War ended. He was even against Confederate monuments that were dedicated to him. He was even against Confederate monuments that were dedicated to him. There were times where they were unveiling a monument, a statue in his honor, and he was asked to attend, and he declined. He said that he was against the Confederate monuments. He said that America needed a time of healing because the Union is bringing the South back into the Union. There's still tensions between the South and the North. And he said there need to be a time of healing. And if you have these Confederate monuments, you're using these Confederate flags, things like this keeps the womb open. Okay. This keeps the wound open. So he said that there had to be a time for healing. If you read this article here from the Atlantic.com, the myth of the kindly General Lee, the myth of the kindly General Lee, the legend of the Confederate leader's heroism and decency is based in the fiction of a person who never existed. This is by Adam Sewer. This is from June 4th, 2017. The myth of the kindly General Lee. But one of the things it talks about in here is how he was against Confederate monuments and using the Confederate flags after the Civil War ended. They also talk about the lost cause. And this is something that they're going to talk about in the documentary from NBC, MSNBC, dealing with the Civil War on Sunday, October 24th. But even if one conceded Lee's military prowess, he would still be responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans in defense of the South's authority to own millions of human beings as property because they are Black. General Robert E. Lee's elevation is a key part of a 150-year-old propaganda campaign designed to erase slavery as the cause of the Civil War and whitewash the Confederate cause as a noble one. This is called the lost cause. You've heard me talk about this before. This lost cause propaganda impacts America today, and especially a lot of people in the South, and gives them a distorted view of history. It gives them a distorted view of history. The ideology is known as the lost cause. And as historian David Blight, who you'll see in the documentary on MSNBC, dealing with the Civil War, as the historian David Blight writes, it provided a foundation on which Southerners built the Jim Crow system, the lost cause. They are unwitting victims of this propaganda campaign, those who lack the knowledge to separate history from sentiment, those who lack the knowledge to separate history from sentiment. And many of these people who buy into this Lost Cause campaign were part of another insurrection, January 6, 2021, at the U.S. Capitol building, which is a continuation of the insurrection known as the U.S. Civil War. Those are directly connected. Those are directly connected. Then there are those whose reverence for General Robert E. Lee relies on replacing the actual Lee with a mythical figure who never truly existed. So read this piece here from theatlantic.com. The myth of the kindly General Lee, the legend of the Confederate leader's heroism and decency is based in the fiction of a person who never existed. All right, we're going to continue. Now, who still needs to register for the 10-week online course that I teach on Saturdays from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968? Because a lot of this we deal with in the class, and we take you through our history chronologically, year by year. It's at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It's a 10-week online course. Each class we go through and analyze approximately a 10-year period of history. And we deal with some events leading up to the Civil War taking place, starting with the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. We talk about the Dred Scott case as well, 1857, March 6, 1857, U.S. Supreme Court case, Dred Scott, which is a really, really deep case, which also, it also involves the Missouri Compromise of 1820, because the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional, and it also deals with the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 as well. All that's tied together in the Dred Scott case, and is before the 14th Amendment of 1868, before the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This is 1857. Okay, so we just posted the link here. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch them anytime. You can ask questions during class. You can see me. I can't see you during class. We have a live text chat. And even after the 10-week online course is over with, you still have access to the full course. You can still go watch the full course. It's on sale now, $70, regularly $130. You can even use it with your children. The content is PG-13. From the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. All right, let's continue. Now, the research also cited a study that analyzed 30 dedication speeches for Confederate monuments and found that half of them used explicitly racist phrases. Some even mentioned protecting the Anglo-Saxon race. So Kashia Henderson, who led the study, went on to say, for communities grappling with Confederate monuments and what to do with them, this work provides some guidance. Now, UVA professor, University of Virginia professor, and researcher Sophie Trewalter said in a statement that it is important to note that the data presented in the study is correlational. The data presented in the study is correlational. She said, we can't pinpoint exactly the cause and effect, but the association is clearly there. We can't pinpoint exactly the cause and effect, but the association is clearly there. At a minimum, the data suggests that localities with attitudes and intentions that led to lynchings also had attitudes and intentions associated with the construction of Confederate memorials. Okay, now, see, this type of information here needs to be, yes, there's some stories written about this. There needs to be a ton of stories because people trying to preserve Confederate monuments say these are not symbols of hate. This is just dealing with our history, and you're trying to take away our history, etc. They have a distorted view of history. This is why America must have a massive history lesson. Because if it doesn't, another insurrection will happen, which is a continuation of the Civil War. At a minimum, the data suggests that localities with attitudes and intentions that led to lynchings also had attitudes and intentions associated with the construction of Confederate memorials. In 2020, the year 2020, 169 Confederate symbols were removed in the aftermath of the racial reckoning prompted by the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other African Americans by police. Okay, I would add in Ahmaud Arbery then also, because it was a former police officer, and these three white men were acting like they were police. Today, more than 2,000 known Confederate monuments still stand throughout the nation, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, these are statues honoring the traitors to the Union, the losers of the Civil War and the traitors to the Union. Nations don't have monuments honoring traitors to the nation. They don't name buildings and schools and military bases and things like this after traitors who led an insurrection against the government. This is why all the military bases need to be renamed, that are named after the ones that are named after Confederate soldiers and generals, things like this. All the Confederate statues have to be taken down. In their place should be historical markers that talk about what was there and why it was taken down, to teach that, to still teach that history. And all those Confederate statues and monuments need to be put into museums, because that history, the correct history, has to be taught. Today, more than 2,000 known Confederate monuments still stand throughout the nation, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, University of Virginia's study, and the Southern Poverty Law Center's 2019 Whose Heritage Report. Both mark the Ignite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, but it's actually called Unite the Right. I'm not sure if this is a typo or they're calling it Ignite the Right rally, but the name of the rally is called Unite the Right, not Ignite the Right. Held to protest the removal of a Confederate statue as a symbol, as a significant moment in the battle over Confederate monuments. Now, after that event, a lot of people that weren't already engaged in activism surrounding these Confederate memorials began to take notice of these things. Kashia Henderson said, "It is important to recognize these memorials live in our public spaces, and this matters. Memorials in our public spaces say something about who is rightful, who is welcomed, and who is entitled in these spaces. So we choose to memorialize in these spaces. So what we choose to memorialize in these spaces should matter." I would also say who we choose to memorialize in these spaces should matter as well. Okay, read this article here from NBC News. Number of Confederate monuments linked to number of lynchings, study finds. This is from October 16th, 2021, NBC News. Now, there's also one from the Washington Post. Washington Post has an article from Wednesday, October 13th, 2021. Counties with Confederate monuments also had more lynchings, study finds. Counties with more Confederate monuments also had more lynchings, study finds. Just one section here of this piece here from the Washington Post. Says as recently as 2015, 57% of Americans saw the Confederate flag as representing quote unquote Southern pride. As recently as 2015, so that's 6 years ago, 57% of Americans saw the Confederate flag as representing Southern pride. Now, this was before Charlottesville in August 2017. They saw representing Southern pride more than racism, according to a CNN poll. 75% of white Southerners felt it represented pride versus only 11% of African American Southerners. This is in 2015. Those numbers had hardly moved from a similar poll taken 15 years earlier in the year 2000. But the debate around Confederate symbols and memorials is not just a matter of opinion. It contains testable questions. Kashia Henderson said, specifically, we can test whether Confederate memorials are associated with hate. We can test whether Confederate memorials are associated with hate. The team compared county level data of lynchings between 1832 and 1950 with data on Confederate memorials. They found that in any given area, and even controlling for population and other demographic variables, the number of lynchings was a significant predictor of the number of memorials. The number of lynchings was a significant predictor of the number of memorials. So read this one as well from the Washington Post. Counties with more Confederate monuments also had more lynchings, study finds. Okay, now this piece here, this is from August 15th, 2017. This is from Mother Jones, the real story behind all those Confederate monuments. And I've done an entire presentation dealing with the history of the Confederate monuments. The two periods of time when you had the most number of Confederate monuments built, and this piece comes from the Southern Poverty Law Center, is about 1895 to 1915. Okay. And if you look at the chart here, so you see between 1885 and about 1895 or so, blacks lose vote, Jim Crow laws enacted. Blacks lose vote, Jim Crow laws enacted. They're rewriting their state constitutions to impose poll taxes and literacy tests, and they are implementing, these southern states are implementing segregation laws in public accommodations, in streetcars, trains, etc. 1889, Florida becomes the first state to have poll taxes. 1890, Mississippi has the Mississippi State Convention, where they rewrite the Mississippi State Constitution and they implement poll taxes and literacy tests to target African Americans, to suppress the African American vote. It becomes known as the Mississippi Plan, and the Mississippi Plan becomes the model that southern states are going to use to suppress the African American vote outside of domestic terrorism. They're going to use that also, but they're rewriting state constitutions, and South Carolina does it in 1895, Louisiana 1898, Alabama 1901, and they're targeting African Americans to suppress the African American vote because during Reconstruction, it's about 2,000 African American men who get elected to public office, including those elected into the U.S. House of Representatives. Okay, you're going to have about 20 elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Actually, I posted an article earlier today. It's from the Zen Education Project. And let's see here. We can probably pull this up here. from the Zen Education Project, and it deals with African-American men in Congress. October 19th, 1870, first African-Americans elected to the House of Representatives. First African-Americans elected to the House of Representatives, Zen Education Project. So when they're changing these state constitutions, they're trying to attack this. They're trying to attack African-Americans who are in Congress, but also keep more from being elected into Congress, and keep them from being elected to the state legislatures. October 19th, 1870, first African-Americans elected to the House of Representatives. So these southern states now, in these states that have Republicans dominating the state legislatures, they're passing these voter restriction laws to suppress the African-American vote, Latino vote, etc., and restrict our ability to vote. One, two, restrict our ability to vote African-Americans, Latinos, etc., into elected office, especially in the House of Representatives and U.S. Senate and the state legislatures. Black Republicans won 3 of the 4 congressional seats in South Carolina. Joseph H. Rainey, Robert C. DeLarge, and Robert E. Elliott. Hiram Rhodes Revels had been elected in 1869 and 1870 to the Senate. He was out of Mississippi. He was a U.S. Senator. This is Hiram Rhodes Revels right here, all the way to the left. Hiram Rhodes Revels. Senator Hiram Rhodes Revels and Representatives Benjamin S. Turner, Josiah T. Walls, Joseph H. Rainey, Robert Brown Elliott, Robert D. DeLarge, and Jefferson H. Long. Now, in South Carolina during Reconstruction, the majority of the state legislature was made up of African-American men. And South Carolina had a huge African-American population. In Mississippi, the majority of the population in Mississippi is going to be African-American, including in 1890, when the minority population, white people, especially in the state legislature, are going to change the state constitution to suppress the African-American vote and legalize poll taxes and literacy tests. The Reconstruction era of the United States is one of the most important yet misrepresented or ignored periods in U.S. history. Though often overlooked in classrooms across the country, Reconstruction was a period where the impossible suddenly became possible, And you had a lot of white people who resented, because you're going to have former slaves who are going to be elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, as well as the state legislature. And you're going to have a lot of white people, especially white men, who resent. Now you have former slaves voting on laws that impact everybody. Okay, so if we go back quickly here, look at this chart, and then I have to get out of here. 1895 to 1915, that period of time, and you have rewriting of the state constitutions. You have an increase in lynchings also during this period of time. 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, U.S. Supreme Court case. 1898, Williams versus Mississippi, U.S. Supreme Court case also, and that challenges the Mississippi State Constitution and the poll taxes, literacy tests that were obstacles to the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. U.S. Supreme Court ruled that those obstacles did not violate the U.S. Constitution, did not violate the 15th Amendment. The movie The Birth of a Nation that comes out on February 8th, 1915. You have this lost cause myth that's being promoted during this period of time also. So we see a huge spike in the number of Confederate monuments being built during that period of time. Then you go through 1920s, 30s, 40s, you go through World War I, World War II, I should say. You go through that period of time and you see a huge decline in the number of Confederate monuments being built. Then during the Civil Rights Movement, about 1955 to 1970, you're going to see an increase in the number of Confederate monuments being built, even though it's is less than the huge spike that we saw from about 1895 to 1915, we're going to see another spike in these Confederate monuments, as well as renaming existing schools after Confederate soldiers and generals, things like this. They become opposition to the civil rights movement. They become a symbol of opposition to the civil rights movement and to Brown versus Board of Education, 1954 U.S. Supreme Court case that desegregated the schools. They become opposition to that. So read this here from Mother Jones, the real story behind all those Confederate statues. All right. Now, so these are just some of the things that we deal with in the online course. Also, I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have book references, articles, video clips, all of that. And we go through our history chronologically, and we look at some of the things that led up to the Civil War taking place, starting with the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. Then we go through and look at the Civil War, Reconstruction era, Juneteenth, what happens after the Civil War ends. We look at the Reconstruction era, advances African Americans were making, but also opposition to us making advances as well. Okay. We look at the Freedmen's Bureau, the Freedmen's Bank. Freedmen's Bureau is underfunded. Okay. The Freedmen's Bureau is underfunded. And mismanaged. The Freedmen's Bank is mismanaged also. We lose $2.9 million worth of deposits in the Freedmen's Bank. We still haven't recovered from the Freedmen's Bank collapsing and the Freedmen's Bureau also closing, because the Freedmen's Bureau only existed for a few years, but you're coming out of 246 years of slavery. You know, the Freedmen's Bureau, the U.S. Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees, and Abandoned Lands, that should have existed for decades at least, because it was helping former slaves. It was helping them find lost loved ones, helping them get married. It was providing them with food, providing them with education, helping them negotiate labor contracts, all different types of things like this. The Freedmen's Bureau was doing. It's also helping poor, destitute white people, because there are a lot of destitute white people as well. The Freedmen's Bureau, formerly known as the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, it also helped redistribute confiscated land, also redistributed to former slaves. Was established in 1865 by Congress to help millions of former Black slaves and poor whites in the South in the aftermath of the Civil War. The Freedmen's Bureau provided food, housing, and medical aid, established schools, and offered legal assistance. It also attempted to settle former slaves on land confiscated or abandoned during the war. However, the Bureau was prevented from fully carrying out its programs due to a shortage of funds and personnel, along with the politics of race and Reconstruction. The full commitment from even Republicans, the full commitment wasn't there. Okay, so we deal with things like the Colfax Massacre, 1873, Colfax, Louisiana, Eufaula Massacre. We're going to look at massacres around that dealt with political violence to target African Americans, to keep us from voting, to punish us for voting, intimidate us, etc. On November 3rd, 1874, deadly election riots took place in Barber County, Alabama. The White League, which is a paramilitary group affiliated with the Democratic Party at the time. This is before the party realignment. This is even before the Compromise of 1877, when the Republicans conspired with the Democrats for Rutherford B. Hayes to become president, and he would agree to remove the remaining Union troops out of the South that were protecting the rights of African Americans to a certain extent, because the Democrats wanted, largely the Southerners wanted, those Union troops removed from the South so they can take back control of all aspects of society and fully impose white supremacy. The White League attacked African American voters at the polls in Eufaula and Spring Hill, Alabama. 7 African Americans were killed and 70 others wounded. More than 1,000 African Americans were driven away from the voter polls due to the violence of this white supremacist group. Okay, this is the Eufaula massacre of 1874. This was the Election Day massacre. We have Vicksburg massacre, 1875, Vicksburg, Mississippi. We deal with, of course, the Mississippi State Convention, 1890. We talk about the all-white primaries. We talked about this Sunday night when I shared the segment where we spoke with Representative Al Green out of Texas, dealing with the gerrymandering that's taking place right now in Texas, targeting the district in Houston, Texas, the 2 districts in Houston, Texas, that Representative Al Green and Representative Sheila Jackson Lee represent. And Republicans have redrawn the district lines to collapse that district into one district and force them to run against each other. They're trying to take out one of them. Well, all white primaries was something that they had in Texas, and they were ruled unconstitutional in 1944. When literacy tests, poll taxes, and grandfather clauses, and we see grandfather clauses in 1898 in Louisiana, and they're written into the Louisiana, we see that law passes in Louisiana, 1898. When literacy tests, poll taxes, and grandfather clauses, and the many other ways to circumvent the 15th Amendment did not work to suppress black voter turnout, white legislators in several southern states used all white primaries to all but eliminate black voters' presence in the electoral process. After a white election official blocked an African-American man named Lonnie E. Smith the right to vote in the 1940 Texas Democratic primary, the NAACP's Thurgood Marshall and William H. Hastie challenged the case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1944, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Smith versus Allwright that the Texas white primary system was unconstitutional. You go back to 1876, see in Texas, they had purity of the ballot box because they were also trying to limit African Americans from voting. They had that purity of the ballot box clause in their Texas state constitution of 1876. And we know Texas comes into the Union in 1844 as a slaveholding state. That used to be part of Mexico. Texas wins its independence from Mexico in 1836. Now, in Texas, for example, the legislature gave the Democratic Party the authority to set its own rules. The party determined that it was for white voters only, excluding African Americans from its elections and effectively making local electoral politics dominated by one party that upheld Jim Crow laws. Okay, so we deal with all this history. In World War I, World War II, U.S. involvement in World War I, how the U.S. gets involved in 1917. We deal with the Great Pandemic of 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic, which happens towards the end of World War I, and is going to kill 675,000 Americans from 1918, 1919, 1920. Then 1919, you have the Red Summer, which is the year after World War I ends, and you have over 25 major race riots in the country. And this is 4 years after The Birth of a Nation comes out. And we're fighting back against the movie The Birth of a Nation, having protests. William Monroe Trotter is having protests in Boston. Charlotta Bass, who's the publisher of the California Eagle, black newspaper in California. She's leading protests in California against the movie The Birth of a Nation, because the movie was causing race riots in the streets, and all of the negative stereotypical images of African Americans were depicted in this movie. And this movie rejuvenated the Ku Klux Klan and showed the Klan as being the heroes of the movie by putting down after slavery ends during the Reconstruction era, they put down a rebellion of former Union Negro soldiers the Ku Klux Klan. They're made to be the heroes of the movie. And this movie was so popular that the Ku Klux Klan would take out recruiting ads in newspapers next to ads advertising the movie The Birth of a Nation. Because by 1915, the Klan is 50 years old, founded December 24th, 1865 in Pulaski, Tennessee. By 1915, the Klan is not a major factor. A lot of the older members, original members had died out. And there's going to be a second incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan, which comes about in October of 1915. And it's founded by the Reverend William Joseph Simmons. And he's going to create this second incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan after seeing the movie The Birth of a Nation. Okay, Washington Post has a good article. The preacher who used Christianity to revive the Ku Klux Klan. The preacher who used Christianity to revive the Ku Klux Klan. This is a piece here from the Washington Post about the Reverend William Joseph Simmons. It was approaching midnight on October 16, 1915, when Methodist preacher William Joseph Simmons and at least 15 other men climbed Stone Mountain. Where? In Georgia. Stone Mountain in Georgia that I just showed you the picture of. And on the side of Stone Mountain, which is the largest Confederate monument in this country, are the carvings of General Robert E. Lee, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, and Jefferson Davis. October 16, 1915, the Reverend William Joseph Simmons and 15 other white men climbed Stone Mountain in Georgia. They built an altar and set fire to a cross. They took an oath of allegiance to the invisible empire and announced the revival of the Ku Klux Klan. They announced the revival of the Ku Klux Klan on top of Stone Mountain. Beneath a makeshift altar, glowing in the flickering flames of the burning cross, they laid a U.S. flag, a sword, and a holy Bible. Quote, the angels that have anxiously watched the Reformation from its beginnings, said the Reverend William Joseph Simmons, who declared himself imperial wizard, quote, must have hovered above Stone Mountain and shouted hosannas to the highest heavens, end quote. Last Wednesday, on the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., progressive faith groups held a march in Washington to combat racism and atone for the history of that prejudice. So read this article here because it ties us to the birth of a nation. And Reverend William Joseph Simmons saw the movie The Birth of a Nation and was inspired by the movie to rejuvenate the Ku Klux Klan. Restricting membership to white Christians, the Klan wore white robes to symbolize purity, burned crosses to signify the light of Christ, and picked selective scriptures from the Bible to preach white supremacy. The invisible empire's comeback was aided by Hollywood's first blockbuster, D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation, which glamorized the Ku Klux Klan. So read this article here, the preacher who used Christianity to revive the Ku Klux Klan. This is from, what's the date on this? Yeah, April 10th, 2018. April 20th, 2018 by Deneen L. Brown. She writes some good articles for the Washington Post. All right, so be sure to register for the 2 online courses that I teach on Saturday and Sunday. From the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. We do the Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are recorded and archived. You can go back and watch them anytime. This one's on sale $70, regularly $130. As soon as you register, you can watch the class we did last week. And then also the other course that I teach is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We do this Sundays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. We deal with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. It's a 10-week online course also. That's on sale $80, regularly $130. We have a course bundle for a very, very limited time only, where you can register for both classes for $100, regularly $260. We'll post that link here also for the course bundle. So this is at our online school. This is not on Facebook or YouTube, anywhere like that. Okay, we'll post this link here for the course bundle also. If you want me to do a presentation for a group or organization, email me at ahnshow@africanhistorynetwork.com, ahnshow@africanhistorynetwork.com, or at the ahnshow@gmail.com, the ahnshow@gmail.com. If you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, or teach a class either virtually or in person. We know that African American History Month is coming up in February. We know Kwanzaa is coming up in December, in January. Dr. King Day is coming up as well. So contact me. All right, look, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you tomorrow.